Ryan Shea, Pokemon Sword and Shield.
Yep.
This was technically my second time visiting Game Freak. This was your first time.
Yes, it was.
What was your impression of walking through those doors, sir?
It was cool just knowing like the history that happened in that like series of rooms that we kind of walked through a vanilla hallway to.
Yes, they were delightfully escorted through quickly.
Yeah, but if you didn't have that sense of history and like what was going on behind the scenes of those rooms, like it would just be pretty ordinary. Like
it's a lot of Pokemon toys.
Yeah, there's a lot of Pokemon toys, which is awesome. Like the conference room we were in, like, you know, has like kind of like a museum set up on either side where it's like just display cases. And on one side, it's like all the figures of all the Pokemon, all like the mainline Pokemon entries, like from red and green all the way up to Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. And then on the other side, it's like the soundtracks of those games plus like all the side games.
Right.
So
but
like
it's
overall,
a lot. It's just a confusing cover story visit structure because normally the way it works is you go to a studio, they usually have like a PowerPoint presentation. They'll kind of walk you through some high level stuff. Have
Here's
a
a
director.
schedule.
Yeah, stuff like that. Then like, okay, we'll have a demo of the game here, time for questions here, video scheduled here, blah, 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 blah. But both times I've been to Game Freak, and this time in particular, since it was actually for a cover story instead of just kind of like a general feature visit, it is so bizarre and delightful, but bizarre because it's like, let's just sit you down in this conference room. Here's Masuda, who's been on the series since the beginning, and Omori, who's been there since the original Ruby and Sapphire, I believe.
Ruby Sapphire, yeah.
Yeah, and now he's directing Sword and Shield. But just sitting you down with them, and it's like, what do you want to know? And it is the privilege of a lifetime to get to go to Game Freak and then just sit down. It's like, oh, I can ask about anything? All right, here's what we want to know. What did you want to know, Shay?
I wanted to know about Pokemon Sword and Shield.
Very, very shrewd. And what did you learn about that? What was the most interesting thing you learned?
The fact that the development team had to basically double in order to make this game and like how much more difficult it is to make a console game.
Really?
This is interesting.
Double?
Yeah, so it was around 100 developers last time we were at Game Freak, which was 2017, and they say that now they're up to like 180 to 200. But then they still contract out with a lot of people. So he's like, oh, you include the localization teams, Nintendo. Like, we're talking like maybe 1,000 or so people. But within Game Freak, it's about 180 to 200 developers, which definitely is a big change. They've expanded to more floors since the last time I was there. And I'm so happy you led with that because that's one of the most interesting things I think about the visit overall was just trying to get a sense of why not expand bigger, which might be an insane statement. But when the games sell as well as they do, this is one of those profitable games ever made. I mean, this team could have a Destiny scope and size if it really wanted to, right?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's
the biggest franchise in the world, right?
It's the biggest entertainment franchise in the world.
Which
Yeah.
is insane to think about.
Right,
But
and
also, it's everywhere.
Right, and the premier RPG mainline series, which is driving everything forward, you think they could throw a lot more behind it, so why don't they? And talking to Masuda about that is interesting. These are my notes for Shinmu. Get out of here. So Masuda was just stressing, like, hey, I would love to make games with 20 people if I could. Like, that is my ideal. Because he's just so insistent on, like, the way he put it was, when you have a bigger team, there's too many branches on that tree. Like, he wants to keep it small because communicating is so challenging on development teams. And it comes up over and over again with AAA games, right? Communication is just what sinks a lot of projects, puts them in development hell. And he's like, man, if we had to like explain the concept of Dynamaxing to more than 30 people, he's like, it would get so messy and complicated and just a disaster. So keeping that team as tight as possible while still being able to crank out these mainline RPG series is their mission. Now, I know the community, on the other hand, is like all hands on deck, get the national decks in there. Like, I think the community wouldn't mind it if they ballooned, but Game Freak has such small indie roots, and Masuda is kind of the spiritual lead of that studio at this point, right? And his desire to keep things small, I think, is a fascinating, almost disconnect with maybe what the community would like.
Do you get any sense from those guys that they're exhausted from Pokemon at all, or that they're like, all right, here we go, another Pokemon, like, feels like we're doing the same thing, like, this is my life? Or are they, like, genuinely excited about
They're
this
always,
thing?
well, I mean, for the day that we're there, they can muster excitement about Pokemon. I do think it's an exciting franchise. When it's so successful, there's enough there to kind of chew on, I think, to keep things interesting. That's why they want to shake things up with every entry.
Yeah.
But the interesting part, and we'll talk about it a little bit later with Little Town Hero, is coming from Masuda, he came up with what they call what is it? The Gear project system, where it's a little bit Valvean. And I'll let you talk at some point, Shay. Just, I don't know when.
Valvean?
Yeah, like Valve, right? Where it's like it's the Gear project system within Game Freak. It's when a project is ramping down, like Pokemon Sword and Shield, or another project's just ramping up, and there's some downtime. If any 3 developers can agree to work on a project, they can start a little sub-project within Game Freak, which is how things like Giga Wrecker come around, Tembo, stuff like that.
That's what you mean by Valvean.
That's
Not
right.
this obscure black box where you have no idea what anybody's doing.
No. Instead, it's like a red and a white box,
Okay,
I
great.
believe. Yeah.
Only also they're making games, which is
Also,
not
they're-
Valvean.
Yes, that's a great point. And so that, I think, is an interesting way for the company to kind of refresh themselves every once in a while, right? By having these different projects. And that's still... Oh, again, I have a lot to say about Game Freak. I'm sorry. But that's what's fascinating about that studio is it has such an indie spirit, and they're pushing this entire franchise along with the mainline RPG series. Meanwhile, the juggernaut Nintendo owns a chunk of Pokemon.
Yeah.
The Pokemon Company at this point obviously owns a chunk of Pokemon. So it's just like these mega corporations all looking to and counting on a relatively smallish team to keep moving ahead.
So do they have just such a small piece of that pie that like they're not raking in the money necessarily? Like they have only so much they can throw into it. I
I think
assume
that-
Nintendo would give them a ton of money.
Oh
if they
no, I
wanted
don't think
it,
they're
but-
funding these things on their own. Yeah,
Yeah.
obviously it's being funded and published by other folks, but at the same time,
But they're not making the millions necessarily.
I think they're doing all right.
I think they're doing just fine.
But definitely, I think that's what's fascinating is when Game Freak, even when we were there were a couple references to like, hey, you want to talk about Little Town Hero? Should we talk about Little Town Hero, right? And it's like, because that's where they get to keep
Oh,
a
sure.
larger piece of that pie. And I think that's a fascinating idea is them trying all these little projects just to like, it's nice to get out from Pokemon every once in a while. Also, financially, we can kind of profit directly from these instead of Pokemon, which
Can
is...
we strike oil twice?
Yeah.
Where is it?
Exactly. Yeah. Instead of just being sliced every which way with Pokemon.
Yeah, I forget what Masuda's answer was. I asked him like, would you ever want to do something with the Gear project system?
Oh,
And
yeah.
he did say yes, but I completely forget what
He wanted to make a shooting game like R-Type.
Oh, that's right.
Is what he
yeah.
said in the rapid fire. And I trimmed that answer down a little bit, but he's like, I've always loved games like R-Type. I've wanted to make something like that for a long time. He's like, I don't know if I could anymore, frankly, but I don't know, something
It'll
like
just
that.
end up being like a turn-based RPG instead.
Right. Okay. So
And I think that kind of piggybacking off of keeping this the size of the team smaller
Yeah.
is like they kept circling back to the idea of simplicity.
yes.
Like that was something that they just kept harping on every facet, whether it was designing Pokemon or like designing the mechanics for the game or just designing the communication within the team. It was like simplicity is key on like designing a Pokemon game.
It's such a weird thing, and maybe just when it's coming through translation, it's a little bit like we talked about last week with haikus or something, where it's like you're reading too much into it. But I found it absolutely fascinating. Where Masuda said, "Hey, it's really difficult to make things simple," and he made this grand analogy looking at the new character of Score Bunny. He's like, "Yeah, you look at this; it's simple enough to be like, oh, I can draw that. Kids can see it and say, oh, I can draw that." But at the same time, like getting to that level of clean simplicity is so hard and takes so many iterations. And he used that as an analogy to talk about the Pokemon brand and mainline RPG series overall, where it's like, yeah, the wild area looks simple and clean. You don't think about all that's going on underneath the hood to create it, so you can trade in the background, have online players there. And he even said we had like a water bottle on the table, and the label was covering 30% of the water bottle. And he's like, this is like Pokemon. Like, they don't have the label going over the entire thing. It's clean. Only a little bit of the water bottle is actually taken advantage of because you need that larger simplicity for people to be able to grab onto it. Mm-hmm. Wise words from a man who spent a lot of time thinking of a Pokemon.
Did they show you any of the super early sketches of some of those like characters and like here, this is the really complicated like first version we did?
No.
I wish they did because they talked about how like they just iterate so many times and like the iteration cycles get longer and longer. It's like, no, that's too complicated. No, we need to go back to the drawing board with this one particular thing. I was talking to art director James Turner for a while about just the process of creating a Pokemon.
A British lad
who relocated to Tokyo to design Pokemon.
It's an amazing career, and we have videos with him coming up later in the month.
It was just like talking about the process of like, all right, the designers came and said they need a Pokemon that's like this. Come up with something like that. And, just going back and forth and having discussions with the team about what is like, what's too simple, what's like too complex.
And the crazy thing is, after visiting the Monster Hunter team several times, how similar their messaging is. Monster Hunter to a much greater degree, but with Pokemon as well, it's like James was stressing like, hey, you'd be shocked how strict it is around here to like make these real creatures. You can't just say, hey, here's an ice cream cone, here's a Pokemon, right? It's like, no. You have to explain why it's that way.
Yeah.
And like to the point that, the Galarian version of Wheezing, what a hoot. It's got the dumb stovepipe thing. It's a great looking thing. But it's like, oh, no, there needs to be logic. Like he's inhaling the smog and then projecting it out of the top and to clean and like recycle the air. Like that level of anatomy and anatomical detail is important to the Pokemon series in a way you would not expect for a series that has cranked out something like Klefki.
That's amazing.
And he's like, you can't just make a cool or cute looking thing. It has every part of it has to have a reason. Like, why does it have those horns? Oh, it's because this other Pokemon is a predator and it needs to defend its young or something.
Right.
I wonder if they've seen that Pokenatomy book. Did you guys read that interview I did?
Yeah, I did.
A couple months ago, a guy wrote a book called Pokenatomy, where he's an actual like science teacher, biology teacher, and he went and tried to investigate like, how do these Pokemon actually work? Like, do they, like, how does that ice cream Pokemon, like, how does that actually, like, work biologically? And it's kind of interesting. So it sounds similar to this.
I think the process involves you have to pitch the panel and explain how these Pokemon work.
Sure.
So they do a lighter version of that internally.
And you asked them about, like, evolution, too, right? Like, natural, Darwinian
rapid
evolution?
fire.
I think it was a little goofier. Like, unfortunately, we didn't get, like, into the nitty gritty of evolution.
But because there are different regional variations, that would imply that Darwinian evolution does exist in the Pokemon universe. But yeah, the rapid fire, they were such good sports and it always makes me laugh and makes me happy when I can make them laugh, and especially when they're still lighthearted and silly about this franchise that is such a juggernaut. Like just the fact that you can ask about, does Darwinian evolution exist with Pokemon? And that Masuda's like, oh, I don't know. Like, I haven't thought about that. Like, there's still so much flexibility within this series, even though there's, 4 people from the Japanese Pokemon company, like watching intently with every answer they give and stuff off to the side. It's very fun.
It's fun.
It's a fun dynamic.
Did you guys actually learn anything about the game then? Or was
What
it
game?
mostly... it's called Sword and Shield, I
It was
think?
mostly behind the scenes stuff, but we did have a few stories that we threw up on GameInformer.com that were like the new stuff that we learned about the game. Like autosave is in the game, which is interesting. You can turn it off if you don't want it.
Right.
But I think that's pretty cool. I think that especially if I'm playing in handheld mode, there's a good chance that it will die while I'm playing and I'll forget to save, even though Switch is very good about warning you that your battery's about to die.
Right.
The Game Boy Color was not so good about that, and I lost many saves.
That's true. Yeah, that is a change. I mean, it really is to these level of details. Like, we didn't see a demo of the game. We didn't see concept art that I can think of while at the studio. We have some that we're going to put up in a gallery later, which is surprisingly cool, and like I love it because it's
Very
really
cool.
rough early stuff, which is fun to see, along with like descriptions of who drew it and why and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the game itself, it's like learning a lot of those details like through the rapid fire, right? Like, okay, experience share is no longer an item, which I would alternate between turning that off and on in the past. I'm a little bit bummed out that that's just baked in, so now all your Pokemon will level up, which I think is kind of, the series has been inching towards that way anyway, and obviously Let's Go had that as a function, so...
Yeah, I'm definitely an experience share person, so ever since I used it for the first time, I'm like, oh, this is the way to play.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
That's an interesting window, though, that they're interested in appeasing fans who might not even want, like, autosave. That just seems like such a modern, normal thing.
Well, I wonder if experience share became a hard thing to balance. Like, all right, if you're only leveling this one Pokemon, it's going to make this part easy, or this part really easy for you, but if you're leveling everyone evenly, it's going to make that part really hard.
Well, I get that
like, autosave
kinda,
is-
but autosave, like, you
Yeah.
think everybody would want that.
I know, it seems like a default.
Well, the thing is with that is like if you're trying to catch a legendary Pokemon, like you want to save before you go into that battle. So if you don't catch it,
Okay.
you can back out and like restart the game
Okay.
and try again.
So
Like,
I guess that makes sense then.
yeah.
I stand
technically-
corrected.
It technically checks out. In terms of difficulty and balancing, I mean, it's shocking to go back. I don't know if you played on 3DS, but go back to those original games. Like, oh, actually a little bit of grinding is recommended.
Yeah.
Whereas Sun and Moon, we did the game club on it when that came out in 2016. Oh my God, did that hold your hand? And
until the end where it was like suddenly a giant difficulty spike in some of those end game battle or post game battles.
Right. So a couple things are exciting with Sword and Shield on that front. One is that Iwao, who directed Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, he's the like battle
Planning director.
Planning director is the official term, but he mainly focuses on the battles with Pokemon Sword and Shield. And he was emphasizing that like the max raid battles where you're fighting like a Dynamax out there, he's like, it's actually gonna be like the most challenging content relatively for the RPG series. And so I'm excited to see how challenging that is.
We said like because they're rated kind of like a Pokemon Go raid where it's like 1 to 5.
Yeah.
And if you go into like a 5-star raid, like he's like, there's situations where I will not win. And if you watch the rapid fire interview, Masuda and Omori said that Iwau's probably the best or like one of the best competitive battlers. So like that's saying something. If he's like one of the best competitive battlers in the studio and he can lose sometimes.
And they say it's not inspired by Pokemon Go's raids.
Well, they said they came up with it before Pokemon Go implemented it, and they had it called cooperative battles, like something really generic. And then once they saw like, oh, people like the term raid for this type of thing, like we can just call it a raid and people instantly know what it is.
And Pokemon Go invented the term raid.
I do believe
So,
that's
yeah,
true.
that
I
is
do
true.
believe that's true. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. And then in terms of holding your hand, the way they're talking about the wild areas has me intrigued. They wouldn't reveal when in the game you get access to it, but the way it's explained is like, oh, you can kind of choose your play style. Like if you want to have a slightly more open world-ish Pokemon experience, you can go into the wild areas and just go explore to your heart's content, or you can kind of stay on the more linear path and just keep moving through the story. So just seeing the series dip a toe in that slightly more open water, it's like, oh my God, just jump in, please.
I just want like Breath of the Wild Pokemon.
Which last
That'd be
time
cool.
we went to the studio, I had an interview with Masuda where I talked about exactly that, about, you know, would you ever make a Pokemon meets Breath of the Wild? And he's like, well, no, because I don't know what you'd be doing if the world was that open. It's like, raising Pokemon, defeating gyms, it's right there. But if you want to see that addressed, it's in our video series from 2017. You can probably find that playlist on
And did you yell at him like that?
Ah, I lost my
Yeah,
mind!
come on!
It's right there! Let's see. Other stuff. Okay, there was a weird moment when continuing on the WoW topic here, him talking about how now your starter Pokemon and other Pokemon you catch in the beginning that you might be more sentimental about, they'll be more viable in the end game. Because you know how Pokemon works, where eventually it's like, I gotta get rid of this Pidgeotto or Pidgeot. Like, it's cool, but come on, let's be
like
real
it's
here.
not viable because it has great stats, but the personality type, man, it just sucks.
Right.
Like it kind of, it's a bummer when like there's a Pokemon that you really like and it's just not built for competitive battle. So they have a new mechanic that he won't say what it is.
But he says you'll know when you see it.
Yeah. And basically it'll allow you to use those Pokemon competitively.
So he's implying that it'll fix the breeding issue of people spending too much time breeding.
If they don't want to, because he said they do
Yes.
see value in that effort of trying to like breed the perfect battle specimen. It's like, so if you want to continue doing that, you can. But if you don't, then you can use I have a feeling it's something to do with like either being able to change their personality type or something that like based on how much of like a bond the trainer has with the Pokemon, that'll make them stronger. So like if you had your starter since, you know, day one and you've been using them every single battle, then you probably have a good bond with them and that'll make them stronger.
Right.
Isn't there already items you can give them, like feed them stuff and it increases
But
their
it's still
stats,
like
though?
that innate Pokemon that you catch. Like those stats are really relevant, especially for competitive play. And they did talk a little bit about competitive play that they said we're, quote, feeling really confident about that. And they say like, hey, all throughout development, we've had tournaments, like a big one in the middle of development, just to try and test that competitive edge. And their angle is like the Dynamax abilities where you turn huge for 3 times, which is just a projection we learn, not
which
actually
is
the Pokemon.
Super weird to me.
It's confusing. And
Did
also
they say why that works?
no, they wouldn't really get into the numbers either, because I was trying to ask, like, specifically with the stats, what happens when they're Dynamax? And they're like, well, it's a multiplication of sorts of the stats, but we cannot give exact numbers. Like, come on, everybody.
Well, the weird thing is there's Dynamax and there's Gigantamax. So
Right.
any Pokemon can Dynamax, but only certain Pokemon can Gigantamax.
Wait, which one's bigger?
Well, that's the other thing, is that the Dynamax just makes the Pokemon larger and they have a weird aura around them. Gigantamax makes them larger, but they might change in like physical form. And they also might not just be getting stronger. They might just have like a different ability or a different
Like they would
different
change
stat.
into a different type of Pokemon?
No, like
No,
they just
no.
like think of like Mega Evolution, like
Oh,
how
okay.
like Charizard looked different when he Mega evolved.
So kind of like that.
It would be like a visual difference instead of just getting bigger, and they would have like different abilities potentially. So that's the difference between it. So like since every Pokemon can Dynamax, but only select few can Gigantamax, there might be certain situations for a Pokemon where it's like, all right, well, X Pokemon is out. I'm going to Dynamax him because getting the stat boost would be more valuable than getting whatever this ability that he gets would do. So you have to be strategic about that.
Right. And he's just saying that there's a real tension now in battles, right? Because
Yeah,
you never
'cause-
know when someone's going to pop and do the Dynamax. And so that, I think, will help level the playing field a little bit on the competitive scene, where it's like you could have a turd from the beginning and then Dynamax them along with this mysterious feature, which will kind of level it out. So I think
and
the competitive scene might be more varied than just like having, okay, here are your go-tos.
And like, it's different than Mega Evolution and Z moves because you don't need to have an item in order to use them. So like, you could see like, oh, he's holding a different item. That Pokemon's holding a different item. That means that he can't Mega Evolve or use a Z move. So it's fine. I can just attack. Whereas like a Dynamax, since any Pokemon can do it, it's just like you never know when it's going to happen.
Yeah. So watch what they're holding.
Well, no, not in this one because now you don't know.
Don't look at their hands. in
He's
this
got
one.
a gun. Oh!
But yeah. So also since like they're Dynamax for what, 3 moves? Yeah, it's you know that they're just going to attack then. So if you can figure out a way to defend against that and just kind of weather the storm, it's not like a all of a sudden thing. You know, like they're going to be giant for those 3 moves.
This isn't just for competitive stuff. This will be in like the main game.
Yes.
So like if I'm playing the main game, like it'll be more interesting
Yeah.
and challenging.
In theory,
That sounds
yes.
good because I played Moon
Yeah.
when it came out, and like that was the first game I'd played in like 10 years.
Oh,
first
wow.
Pokemon game. And so like going back to that, I was like, okay, it doesn't feel like much has evolved here, and also it's like super easy.
Yeah.
So like if I could play a game, I still like catching all those Mon. I want to get them all, and that's how it goes, right?
You got it, man.
But I want it to be a little more interesting.
Yes, well, it's interesting. I mean, Sun and Moon is pretty different, like not having gyms, a different structure, things like that. And so a lot of the way they were talking about Sword and Shield was, you'll never believe it, they say they want this to be the best, to be the ultimate Pokemon.
Like no game ever
very
was.
best?
Yes, but they did say that because it's the first mainline series or the mainline RPG on Switch, they kind of wanted to go back to basics in some ways. So that's why gyms are coming back and stuff like that. Brian Shea,
Yeah.
people are saying, based on the cover story, there are 18 gyms in this game.
Yeah.
Would you like to address this?
In a conversation with both Masuda and Omori, I asked them about the difference between Sword and Shield, like just how different are these games?
Right.
And they gave me an answer which I also took the way the internet is taking, which means like, hey, there's a lot of gyms in this game, and like
18.
some of them will be Major League and some of them will be Minor League.
Depending on the types, they'll be flipped for each version,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So that's the way I took it, and that appears to be the way the internet took it in the quote that I put in the cover story. However, the Pokemon company reached out and said, hey, I think there might have been something a little lost in translation, or somebody might have misspoke. So I have the whole quote here.
So hang on, just to be clear, they're saying the message was like, I think there's like a standard amount of gyms in this entry. It's not 18.
Said similar to what has appeared in the past.
Right. So you want to read this quote and
this is
explain why it's confusing?
This is the quote from me asking how different are the 2 games.
Sure.
From an actual game, this is a Shigeru Omori.
I can tell from your voice. I got it.
The director of Pokemon Sword and Shield. From an actual gameplay and experience perspective, there will be certain gym leaders that will be different depending on which version you've played. In terms of the setting itself, the background to the story is there's like this Japanese-style J1 and J2, like minor league and major league kind of concept. There are 18 different types of gyms in the story, and depending on the version, which gyms are in the minor league and which gyms are in the major league are different. For example, in Sword, the fighting type gym will be in the major league, but in Shield, the ghost type. The idea is that every year the Galar region is playing, and which gyms make it into the minor league versus the major league changes. Of course, as always, there's a difference in the kinds of Pokemon you can also encounter.
So that is where the confusion is. He's talking about the 18 types of...
That exist, we think.
Right.
Across both versions.
No. Just in general,
Like
in
the
Pokemon
series,
as
there
a
are
series.
18 types of Pokemon.
Like hypothetical gym
there are 18
possibilities.
hypothetical gym types.
Oh.
Right.
So I think that's where the confusion stemmed from. And
Yeah.
we still don't have an answer to how many gyms there are.
But it's fair to say we hurt ourselves in this confusion. That was a little Pokemon joke.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Or we apologize to people who are confused about that as well. Game Explain, our wonderful friends over there, made a video about it, and I was like, oh no, I feel so bad that that's not accurate.
we didn't know it wasn't accurate.
That's true.
And I don't know if anybody knows what's accurate at this point.
But
we're getting
also,
we're working to get to the bottom of it. And
That's right.
We will update you as soon as we know more.
yes, in terms of
No Maury.
feedback, overall, also I saw a lot of people saying, "Show us the starter evolutions." We do not know what they look like.
No, we don't.
We did not see them. We get like teases. We have a video series. Was that next week? Where it's going to be like a highlight on Grookey, a highlight on Scorbunny, a highlight on Sobble, just about their creation a little bit. And there's some teases in that as well about
Very
like
small teases.
what might be relevant for their evolutions. But we are not going to be revealing those evolutions. And actually, I like that. Like they're playing it all pretty close to the chest. And I kind of like that this time around.
It seems very different from how they did with like X and Y and Sun and Moon. Like they were like, hey, here's what these Pokemon look like.
X and Y in particular,
yeah.
it was like, fully opening that kimono.
Do you think they'd ever get away from like, here's 3 starters, like just do something completely different, like 4?
It'd be fun.
Or just like vary it up quite a bit.
Well, we asked in the rapid fire about like changing from grass, fire, water to like something else, and they're like, no, we don't want to do that. It makes too much sense to have like that rock, paper, scissors in the starters.
But there's still everything is
That's
a rock,
across
paper,
the board,
scissors.
though, yeah.
But I understand. There's certain things where it's like, okay, you want to do things the way you want to do things. It's your series, baby. Other things talking about battling. I thought it was interesting. I didn't even think about this when you asked if there's going to be an announcer in those stadiums.
Yeah.
No announcer.
I was bummed about that, to
Yeah.
be quite honest, because
Yeah.
I really wanted like Pokemon Stadium or Pokemon Coliseum, whatever the recent
Oh,
Wii
is
one.
he down and out?
I wanted that baked into like a main Pokemon game. I
Right.
thought that would be so cool now that we finally have graphics to support it on a
Yeah.
main Pokemon game. But
Brian, you could be that announcer.
I could. I will volunteer next
Shoutcaster.
time I'm in
That's right.
Game Freak.
There's also little details that we learned, like, there's a little camera rotom like flying around,
Yeah.
and so the camera will like cut to its perspective every once in a while for like kind of like that fly-by-wire stadium view in
And
a
like
lot of sports
the
events.
atmosphere was a huge part of it. Like the crowd's going to react to what's going on the field, and like they're going to chant and sing songs apparently, and yeah, it's going to be interesting.
It's gonna be festive.
I want to know how like overwhelming the crowd feels like in a giant stadium like that, because
Yeah,
that's
we'll
always
see.
kind of what you picture like in your head when you're playing like on the original Game Boy games. Like,
Yeah.
I bet there's like people watching and
Yeah,
like
you want
cheering.
it to feel epic, absolutely. Other interesting details: the Sword and Shield names came very late in development.
Yeah.
and they're actually like, okay, let's just look to the legendaries we already made. One's a sword, one's a shield. Let's go with that. And Masuda's like, we thought it was interesting because there's such strong words, but Pokemon are cute, so there's a little something there.
And they were like, yeah, what do you use with the power that you get? Do you use to like attack or protect or something like that? Like if you had power, would you attack something or would you protect someone?
And Ryu's the answer is
Give birth.
give birth, ladies and
Create new
gentlemen.
life. That's what I do.
But then also I thought it was interesting. I didn't understand this at all, but the legendary dogs, their names come because Omori wanted to like get back to the colors. Like
Yeah.
naming things after colors in Pokemon is so important, and he wanted to get back to that with the legendaries. So Zamacenta,
Is the magenta, because that's what color.
right? And
Wait,
then-
really?
Yes,
Does that rhyme work in Japanese?
I guess so, because the legendaries don't get localized. Those names are universal.
Oh, okay.
So even on that front, they mentioned that, like, because they're universal, it becomes tricky. Like, Dialga in Spanish sounded like the word for algae, apparently, but like, F it, we just got to stick with it. But anyway, so then, like, Zacia is Cyan.
Zacian.
I'm sorry. Because
Cyan.
Right, because he's like, oh, it'd be fun, like, because they're legendary, like, people think they see something out of the corner of their eye and they come up with a nickname for it. And it's like, oh, the Cyan thing or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's the name behind those legendaries.
Did you guys ask them about Pokemon Gun at all? Like, if
Oh,
they
that
even,
joke?
Like, noticed that?
Oh no!
Or,
They,
like,
I
what they
mean, they're
thought?
on the internet. I think they
probably
see a
saw
lot of
it.
that stuff.
I wonder
yeah.
if they're like, oh no.
That's the joke. That's going to be the third version and whatnot. Yeah. No, we did not learn anything about that.
We probably would have gotten a no comment if we asked about that.
Oh man, do they love some no comments? But that's fine. You get it. The part that maybe the most emotional being at that studio was like talking to them just about their sense of directing and their different directing styles. Like what a treat. Like talking to Masuda about like handing the reins over to Omori because Masuda just wants to produce games now. He directed Let's Go, but he said like this is the end for me. And so talking about how Omori's directing style is different, he put it in a very beautiful way where Masuda's like, well, I am the composer, right, for a lot of these games, and so I think of things in a very musical way. So when I'm trying to give instructions, it's more soft and flowy, whereas like Omori comes from an art background, so the analogy is he can be like, here's specifically what I want you to do. Here's a drawing. Go
just draw
for it.
it.
But like even learning about like, you know, how much Masuda's mind has to flip from directing mode to composing mode was just fascinating. Like at some point, Omori said that Masuda like sent him an email when they're working on Pearl and Diamond, and he's like, I don't understand. What is with this email? Like, it's the most flowery, confusingly written thing. And I guess Masuda had just been like composing music all day. So he's like, oh, I sent that email and my brain was in composition mode, not directing mode. Because Omori's like, I don't know what this is, dude. Yeah, just fun little details like that.
That's fun.
Or talking to Masuda about, you know, because he's also a programmer as well. And he's like, oh, nowadays I can't really help out with Sword and Shield's programming. He's like, but I do know the mindset of programmers, and I know that when a programmer tells me something's impossible, I know they're lying, because nothing's impossible for programmers. And I know that firsthand, dude.
Get back to work.
It's a fascinating studio.
Mm-hmm. Should people like me,
Yes.
Pokenorms,
Yeah.
people who are like casual fans, be excited for this one? Does this feel like the one that's like, all right, this might be get you back into it a little bit?
I think just having it on Switch, I mean, honestly, Let's Go was better than I was expecting.
I think for a lot of people that was the case.
And even with that baby game in the past, now having, you know, Game Freak's first real stab at a mainline RPG on the Switch.
Well, they said
I'm
that was
excited
like
for
kind
it.
of their way of figuring out the Switch and how to make a game.
They called it their pilot program
Yeah.
for developers. Yeah. And so, you know, I think there's going to be frustrating things in it, but overall, just seeing them inch a little bit more towards freedom and having the new mechanics of Dynamax and just a whole new set of Pokemon, like, I'm going to be excited to play that on my Switch. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, again, we haven't really played too much of it. We played it at E3,
Yeah.
and we didn't. I made a league card.
Oh, yeah. We'll
That was
show
the
that
only
off.
hands-on that I got.
That's true.
During this trip. But yeah,
But even that moment was cool because we got to see like a build of one of the towns, even though they wouldn't tell us what the name of the town was. But you've seen it in the trailers. It's the one with kind of like gears moving and it's kind of red.
it's one that looks like it's in the UK.
That's right. Kind of like red brick and stuff like that. But even seeing like James Turner fly us through that file in Maya, it's like, this is a treat. Just seeing like behind the scenes, like a Maya file for a Pokemon game. We'll be sharing some of that footage in the future as well. But what else we got at GameInformer.com/Pokemon, Brian?
Lots of stuff. We'll have the concept art gallery you mentioned. We'll have a discussion on a potential Pokemon timeline.
Oh,
and by
yeah.
discussion, I mean just a long quote from Masuda talking about it.
Right. Like the merits of whether there's a Zelda-esque timeline for Pokemon, because it does get confusing.
It does. And we'll have lots of videos from you. Like you said, the starter videos. We have the rapid fire up now.
Yeah, that's fun. We also have maybe the one I'm most excited about now that Rapid Fire's out the door is it's really different, but it's James Turner, the art director, who's British. He's drawing his favorite Pokemon a little bit like we did with Darksiders 2. Remember where
cool.
Joe Mad drew Death? It's a little bit like that where he's drawing
like
a
talking
Pokemon
about it.
and kind of explaining his history and the process of drawing. Also, we got that drawing to auction off during Extra Life this
What?
year, so that should be very exciting. So GameInformer.com/Pokemon, a lot of fun stuff.
Awesome.
That was just a clip from a larger show called The Game Informer Show. You can find it on iTunes, Google Play, or GameInformer.com. We take the fun opportunities and exclusive information from Game Informer magazine and boil it into a show that airs every Thursday with exclusive cover story information, developer interviews, a lot of fun stuff. So come love games with us.